Ladies and gentlemen, please find your seats. The program is about to begin.
Ladies and gentlemen, good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen, from the Arcadian Court in downtown Toronto. Welcome to the Empire Club of Canada. For those of you just joining us through either our webcast or our podcast, welcome to the meeting. The Empire Club has had a rich history of political speeches in our archives. We are privileged to have had multiple members of prominent families speak to us over the years. The Kaplans, the Trudeaus, the Jackmans, the Nixons, and now the Mulroneys. Prime Minister Mulroney often eloquently spoke here and invited President Reagan to speak, and to this day we consider him a friend of the club. The Empire Club has also hosted several of Ontario's Attorney Generals over the years. Today, I am thrilled to continue both of these traditions by welcoming our speaker, the Honourable Caroline Mulroney, Ontario's Attorney General. Minister Mulroney has been front and centre over the last few months on several high-profile files that have sparked wide public interest. In looking back to a 1980 Empire Club speech by the Honourable Roy McMurtry, Ontario's longest-serving Ontario General, his view is that it all goes with the territory. He remarked about his own experience, quote, "I'm not trying to ram laws down people's throats, but my job, as I see it, is to raise issues of concern and get people thinking about them, talking about them. An expression of opinion is what I want," unquote. Well, Minister Mulroney, congratulations. You fully jumped into your new role and taken charge of a number of complex files, ones that definitely have resulted in what McMurtry would call expression of opinions. Remember a simpler time when Attorney Generals were focused on banning pit bulls and street racing? Well, it's 2018, and leading major court challenges to overseeing Ontario's approach to the legalization of marijuana, Minister Mulroney has a full agenda and a big to-do list. As proud as I am of the Empire Club's history, our focus today is not on returning the speeches of the former generations. Our focus is on providing a forum to the new influences of the day, the next generation of politicians and change makers. And there is no better example of this group than Minister Mulroney. We are very honored to have the opportunity to hear from her today on today's topic entitled, Federal Legalization of Cannabis, Ontario is Ready. October 17th is upon us, the date which federal legalization of cannabis takes effect across Canada. Minister Mulroney, your speech at the Empire Club is timely, so Ontarians may better understand the government's new privately regulated system and the approach to protecting children, keeping communities and roads safe, and dealing with the illegal cannabis market. Now, after today's speech, the Attorney General has offered to take questions from the floor via question cards available at each table. So I'm briefly going to turn the podium over now to James Skoniak, our sponsor from Bruce Power, to make the introduction. James, come on up.
Thanks, Ken. Great, well, thanks very much. I don't actually know how to beat that introduction. That was a great introduction. You know, when you're going to an Empire Club lunch and you're saying, I'm listening to Caroline Mulroney or introducing Caroline Mulroney, nobody says, who's Caroline Mulroney? So I don't need to do that. But and many of you have seen in the program Caroline's biography, and I certainly won't repeat that. But I do want to share with you two thoughts when I was thinking about how to introduce Caroline today. Compared to many of you in the room, I actually don't know Caroline very well. I had the privilege of hosting Caroline and her husband back, and I think it was March, Caroline, when you and your husband came to tour our facility at Bruce Power. Caroline said it was a date night or a date day, and you came up to Bruce Power. So really exciting date. That would be my idea of an exciting date, but not most people. But really, you know, in terms of thinking of the introduction day, I really wanted to leave people with two thoughts after getting to spend that time with Caroline and her husband. The first is the obvious, which is when you hear Caroline Mulroney's name, the first thing you think about is Mulroney. And I'm sure that's something Caroline and her family are very proud of, and legacy of her father that Kent mentioned. But when you look at Caroline's biography and you look at everything she's done, when she shared with us back in March the work that she was doing at the time campaigning as a candidate. She's worked hard for every single thing she's done on her resume. She's very impressive in her own right. And I think that's very important that we recognize that. Sometimes we think that, some people hang on their family name. You look at Caroline's biography, she works really hard, and you can tell that with everything she does. So I thought that was important to mention. The second thing, absolutely. And the second thing I want to say is, when you work in the energy sector, one of the biggest challenges that we always see, and I know this isn't going to be an energy speech, it's on cannabis, how could it be any different? But when you're in the energy sector, one of the things that drives you crazy is soundbite politics. Because you're always looking for people to come up and learn about what you do. Premier Ford came out with his chief of staff during the campaign, other ministers, and when Caroline was on the site, one of the things that was very clear to me was she took a lot of time to understand the operation. She took a lot of time to ask tough questions. She had follow-up reading material that she wanted. And she's the kind of person that you can tell will always exercise good due diligence. And I think that's what you want in an attorney general. So those are two things I wanted to leave you with. And I'd like to welcome Caroline Mulroney to the stage.
Well, thank you, James. Thank you very much for that kind and personal introduction. So thank you so much for inviting me here today. Merci beaucoup de votre accueil. It's my first chance to stand at this important podium, and I'm very excited to speak with all of you. I'd like to thank your president, Kent Emerson, for giving me the opportunity to join you here in my role as Attorney General, to speak in particular on our government's plan for the upcoming legalization of recreational cannabis by the federal government. Before I turn to that topic, I'd like to address more broadly where our new government stands today. Our government has accomplished a great deal in a very short time. And as I reflect on this from a personal standpoint, I am reminded that things move very quickly in politics. My political career began 14 months ago when I announced that I was seeking the nomination in my riding of York-Simcoe. Thinking back on those days now, they were much simpler times. I would attend events, local community events, and make fun of my brother Ben. And that went a very long way to getting me support. Then came the day that my nephews held Meghan Markle's train in the royal wedding. And it's appropriate that I would speak of this today at the Empire Club. But you know what that was? For a politician campaigning in a Commonwealth country, that was a major political gift. I don't think I could have done better that weekend getting votes than if I had carried Meghan's train myself. In fact, I was door knocking in Holland Landing, and I walked up to a man who was in his truck and he was leaving his property. He had a very nice property with a very big lawn on a corner. And I'd identified it as something I absolutely needed 2 lawn signs on. So I walked up to him, he unrolled his window, and I handed him my literature, my smiling face and my name. And he looked at it and he said, "Mulroney, any relation?" I said, "Yes, as a matter of fact, it's my dad." "No way am I voting for a Mulroney." I thought, all right, plan B. Well, you won't be voting just for me, you'll be voting for Doug Ford, and don't you want to defeat Kathleen Wynne? And that gave him pause. He said, "Well, you know what, I don't make the decisions in this house, you got to go see the boss." So he drives away, and I walk across the driveway, and I knock on the back porch, and I'm a little nervous, because his sons were standing there watching the whole thing, giving me no support in this. And I knock on the door, and his wife opens the door, and I hand her my literature, and I said, "I'm Caroline Mulroney, and I'd really like your support." And she looked at the name on the pamphlet, and she said, "Are you related to Brian Mulroney?" And I said, "Yes, I am." She said, "Is that the little boy who carried Meghan's train in the wedding?" And I said, "Yes, it is." She said, "Can I have your support?" "Yes." "Can I have a lawn sign?" "Absolutely, take 2." So those 2 little boys got me a lot of votes and a lot of lawn signs that long weekend in May. And it's been 5 months since Megan became the Duchess of Sussex, but only 4 months since our government was elected with a majority, 76 seats on June 7th. It has only been 102 days since Premier Ford and our government were sworn in on June 29th. Over this time, our government has been focused on 5 core commitments to the people of Ontario. They are, first, to put more money in people's pockets. Second, to clean up the mess with hydro. Third, to create and protect quality jobs by sending the message loud and clear that Ontario is open for business. Fourth, to restore trust and accountability in government. Fifth, to cut hospital wait times and end hallway health care. Our core commitments are based on the principle that we are here for the people. Now, for the people is not just a slogan. It guides every decision we make. And the Premier has been clear in his guidance to his Cabinet and his caucus. He has a strong vision for a better Ontario, and it starts with the following requirement. When we make decisions, we think about how they will affect every Ontarian, not only the special interest groups and the lobbyists that represent them. After 15 years of Liberal government that had lost its way and lost touch, the people of this province chose a new direction, and our government is working hard to deliver. In fact, we got right to work right after our swearing in, and we have not stopped. Right, Michael? We have not stopped. I am very grateful for this opportunity to serve my constituents in York Simcoe and the people of Ontario, and to be part of a government that is putting the interests of people first. I was honored that the Premier asked me to serve as his Attorney General. As Attorney General, I see the protection of our citizens, our families, and our communities as my guiding priority. It is with that serious responsibility in mind that I approach next week's legalization of recreational cannabis. This significant change to the law made by the federal government has prompted the need for legislative and regulatory responses in each province, and it's a challenge we in Ontario are taking head-on. En tant que procureur général, je considère la protection des citoyens, des familles et des collectivités ma priorité suprême. C'est en gardant à l'esprit cette responsabilité importante que je me prépare à la légalisation du cannabis à fin récréative la semaine prochaine. Cette décision du gouvernement fédéral a entraîné le besoin d'apporter des changements législatifs et réglementaires dans chaque province, un défi que nous relevons de front. It is important to stress that despite the federal government's decision, the serious health and social effects with consuming recreational cannabis will not magically disappear on October 17th. They are very much top of mind. The risks to our children, our roads, and our communities are real, and we are committed to addressing them. And I am happy to be here today to tell you what Ontario is doing to be prepared. I want to tell you how we got here and what is ahead. Now, Cabinet was sworn in on the Friday before the July 1st long weekend. I'm sure I spent the weekend, just like all of you, reading binder after binder of briefing materials. But on the Tuesday morning after the long weekend, Finance Minister Vic Fedeli and I got straight to work on this file. We had to. The Premier was adamant that we be ready. Time was of the essence. The federal government had dictated the legalization date, and the Premier wanted to be sure that Ontario had the right plan in place to protect children and youth, to keep our roads safe, and to combat the illegal market. To provide certainty on each of these priorities, we spoke directly with Ontarians about their concerns regarding the federal government's decision and how to enforce and oversee this decision in a responsible and reasonable manner. Pour apporter plus de certitude à chacune de nos priorités, nous nous sommes adressés directement aux Ontariens et aux Ontariennes afin de connaître leurs préoccupations à l'égard de la décision du gouvernement fédéral et de déterminer comment mettre en œuvre ces décisions d'une manière raisonnable et responsable. Over the course of July and into August, the Premier, Minister Fedeli, and I met almost weekly to determine the right path forward to this complex issue. In mid-August, Minister Fedeli and I announced Ontario would move to a robust private retail system and away from the previous government's public retail model with stores run by the government, by government employees in locations chosen by the government. If I can be frank, we concluded that such a system would be incapable of seriously competing with the illegal market, and in turn, it would leave our communities more vulnerable and susceptible to the underground market. Our government began extensive consultation across Ontario, and we were assisted by members of the Progressive Conservative Caucus, including in particular my parliamentary assistant who is here today, MPP from Durham, Lindsay Park. We met with municipalities, law enforcement agencies, public health advocates, Indigenous communities, business and consumer groups to ensure that we developed a retail and regulatory framework designed to fulfill our three objectives: protecting children, keeping roads safe, and combating the illegal market. Nous avons rencontré des représentants des municipalités, des organismes d'application de la loi, des défenseurs de la santé publique, des communautés autochtones, ainsi que des groupes d'entreprises et de consommateurs. Notre objectif était d'élaborer un cadre réglementaire pour atteindre nos trois priorités, soit de protéger les enfants, d'assurer la sécurité routière et des collectivités, et de combattre le marché illégal. The conversations we undertook proved to be invaluable in shaping the legislation I introduced 2 weeks ago. If I can pull back the curtain for a moment, I want you to know that before making this decision, we closely examined a variety of private retail models, including franchise and contract models, but ultimately, we determined that we could best achieve our objectives through a robust licensing framework. We proposed to establish the Alcohol and Gaming Commission of Ontario as the provincial regulator to oversee the licensing and compliance process because we heard from many people, including municipalities, that the AGCO could leverage its existing experience, expertise, and infrastructure to effectively regulate cannabis retail stores, building on its existing mandate to regulate in the public interest. In our consultations, it was clear that municipalities and police stakeholders were supportive of the AGCO as the province-wide regulator for private cannabis retail stores in Ontario. I want to highlight that the AGCO's 20 years of experience regulating alcohol and gaming makes it perfectly suited to serve as the province's cannabis regulatory authority as well. J'aimerais souligner que la CAJO a 20 ans d'expérience dans la réglementation des alcools et des jeux, ce qui fait de cette commission l'organisme idéal pour servir également d'organisme de réglementation du cannabis dans la province. AGCO staff and its embedded OPP unit possess a deep understanding of compliance and enforcement in sectors that share similar risks as we expect to see in the cannabis market. Turning to the AGCO, already an existing regulator, also eliminated the need to expand the size of government by creating a new regulatory oversight body. While new resources will be needed to help get the AGCO up and running in the short term, ultimately I expect that the licensing regime to run on a sustainable cost recovery basis. Establishing the AGCO as a province-wide regulator also benefited smaller municipalities who could not implement their own municipal licensing regime due to the lack of administrative infrastructure. This approach means that the AGCO can provide communities and operators more certainty through a one-stop licensing approach rather than allowing for a patchwork of municipal licensing regimes around the province. In order to best compete with the illegal market, our government made the decision that the number of licenses for cannabis retail stores would not be capped, but instead would be issued based on market demand. I want to underscore the fact that the proposed legislation will also include regulation-making authority to set concentration limits for how many retail store licenses a single operator can hold to ensure diversity in the market. So our approach will certainly evolve as we gather more information from stakeholders and as we see the market take shape. With this approach, we even found agreement in the most unusual of places, the Toronto Star editorial board. In its October 1st editorial, it said, and I quote, "The government was also right not to place an overall ceiling on the number of stores allowed to get provincial licenses if their applications make the grade. After all," they wrote, "the idea is to make legal pot shops accessible so users don't turn to the black market," end quote. So we anticipate that should our legislation pass, the AGCO would begin accepting retail operator license applications in December and begin its work reviewing the background and suitability of applicants. The AGCO regulates multiple industries, including alcohol and gaming. The due diligence checks for a retail operator's license will be most similar to those conducted for casinos in terms of criminal background checks and the financial due diligence background. We want to ensure that only responsible and accountable individuals are participating in the licensed retail framework. Now, while certain previous activity in the illegal market will not, on its own, bar an applicant from participating, no applicant can have ties to organized crime. These determinations will be made by the AGCO, which will be tasked with ensuring that all people operating in the legal licensing framework behave with integrity, honesty, and in the public interest. We have made this distinction to permit participants in the illegal market to have a path into the legal market if they demonstrate a willingness to play by the rules. It is my view that the system we have proposed provides an opportunity for small and medium-sized businesses to compete in the legal retail space, which we believe is the best way to drive out the illegal market. As a counterpoint, if you are operating an unlicensed store on October 17th or after that date, you will be shut down, and you will not ever be eligible for a retail license. If these operators have an interest in legitimizing their business, they must close their doors or face severe penalties. Now, we also heard loud and clear from both municipal councils at the Association of Municipalities of Ontario and in regional consultations held by our MPPs that the one-size-fits-all approach, the approach of the previous government, was not the right way forward. Municipalities wanted a provincial framework with an opportunity for local input. We heard this message on two key elements of our policy. One, where cannabis stores can be located, and two, where people can consume cannabis. Les municipalités voulaient un cadre provincial ouvert aux perspectives locales. Nous avons tenu compte de ce souhait sur deux aspects clés de notre politique. Premièrement, les lieux où les magasins pourront être situés, et deuxièmement, les lieux où les gens pourront consommer du cannabis. First, municipalities will decide whether there will be any stores in their communities at all. Each municipal council will have the opportunity to opt out of having bricks and mortar retail stores in their communities. Those decisions will need to be made by January 22nd of next year. That gives each municipal council 3 months from the municipal election date to make this decision. And the decision date is 5 months after we announced our intention to move to a private retail model. In my experience, people run for office precisely because they want to help shape important decisions in their communities. And every municipal candidate has known for months that they will have a very big, very important decision in front of them should they be elected on October 22nd. My guess is that the vast majority of municipal candidates have already formed an opinion on this issue one way or another. I therefore have every confidence that with 5 months of debate, local councils will have no difficulty making the best decisions to meet the needs of their communities. Nevertheless, municipalities that feel they need more time to consider their community's specific circumstances would have the option of opting in to the private retail framework when the time is right for their community. For municipalities that do have stores, municipalities will have a say in where the stores go. This will be accomplished without resorting to duplicative licensing or a patchwork of zoning bylaws. When the AGCO is considering an application for a retail store authorization, the public and municipalities will be provided a 15-day period to share their views on the proposed store location. The AGCO must consider the public interest, including the needs and wishes of residents of the municipality when issuing licenses and authorizations. Now let me pause here to provide some thoughts for potential retail store operators. Nobody in Ontario has the right to a cannabis retail license. The AGCO's due diligence process will be strictly applied and thoroughly enforced. And the role of public commentary in this process is real. Before you pick your store locations, be mindful of the importance of local responses that can be provided within the 15-day comment window. We have also heard clearly from the community, and from community to community, that local views varied widely on where cannabis should be permitted to be consumed. For instance, I heard from Smith Falls, a town looking to develop a cannabis tourism industry, that they wanted people to be able to smoke cannabis on golf courses. Other communities wanted much stricter consumption rules. Most pressingly, the prior government had an unrealistic and unenforceable one-size-fits-all province-wide model that meant that residents, particularly in large urban centers, would have nowhere to legally consume cannabis once it was legal. To remedy this issue, we took the advice of experts, including the Centre for Addiction and Mental Health, and largely aligned the rules for cannabis consumption with tobacco restrictions in the Smoke-Free Ontario Act. This approach prohibits smoking and vaping of cannabis in areas where the smoking of tobacco is also prohibited, such as playgrounds, childcare facilities, schools, and hospitals. Our approach also allows local municipalities to enact bylaws that further restrict smoking cannabis beyond the provincial minimum standards in places like parks, as you can see on the screens next to the stage. Once again, these proposed amendments have been crafted after consultations across the province and are designed to allow each of Ontario's 444 municipalities to shape consumption rules that work for them. While I have appreciated the chance to speak with you today on how our legislation will provide certainty to Ontarians regarding the federal government's legalization of cannabis on October 17th, I am pleased to announce that you will be hearing this message again, and more often and closer to home. As my colleague Darryl Cramp, MPP for Hastings, Lennox, and Addington, said to me last week, we can't just legislate, we need to educate. It's the same message we heard consistently in our consultations with healthcare professionals, educators, and police. Beginning next week, we will launch an awareness campaign, some of which is previewed on the screens on stage, to educate and communicate with people regarding the applicable rules, regulations, health and safety measures. La semaine prochaine, nous allons lancer une campagne de sensibilisation, dont vous pouvez déjà voir une partie sur les écrans derrière moi, afin de faire connaître à la population les règles, les règlements et les mesures de santé et sécurité applicables. While you will be seeing some of our advertising on the airwaves, we are placing a particular focus on engaging people, and particularly younger people, on the digital and social media channels where they are spending an increasing amount of their time. It should go without saying that these ads do not promote cannabis use or the cannabis market, but will instead focus on social responsibility, including the serious health and addiction risks for short and long-term cannabis use. And our message will remain clear. We will plainly tell Ontarians how our children, communities, and our roads will be protected, and how we will work to combat criminals. Our messages will be apparent and accessible where people live and commute, on social media, and where they view content online, on television, and across university and college campuses. We have a diverse province with many nationalities represented and languages spoken. To ensure we reach Ontarians in their communities, television and online video ads will also feature voiceovers in more than 10 languages. Our intent is clear, and not $1 will be spent on anything besides raising awareness around the rules and the health and social risks we face with the legalization of this product by the federal government. The deterring effects of our zero-tolerance policies will be amplified through these ads, which will work to educate people around the dangers of driving impaired and the stiff penalties. Many people will be looking for as much information as possible when recreational cannabis becomes legal. Because of this, all ads, including search-optimized ads, will direct viewers to the government's ontario.ca cannabis homepage for more detailed information and resources. And no matter where or how you hear about our government's plans, our commitment to protecting youth, roads, and community safety and fighting the illegal market will always be paramount. Quel que soit l'endroit où vous visionnez notre campagne de sensibilisation, notre engagement est de protéger les jeunes, à assurer la sécurité routière et des collectivités et à lutter contre le marché illégal. I've said it before, but I cannot say it enough. We and the AGCO will have zero tolerance for anyone who provides recreational cannabis to youth and kids. We are confident that when taken together, our proposed licensing model, overseen by the AGCO, the flexibility and the certainty we are providing to local communities, and the public awareness campaign I shared with you today are the best way forward to achieve our objectives. Together, I am confident we will ensure we protect our children, keep our community and roads safe, and combat the illegal market. My confidence in our approach is drawn from the fact that our Premier and our government has made this file a priority since day one. Collectively, our determination to work with communities across Ontario to address the health and social risks associated with cannabis consumption has not wavered for a single day because we all understand what is at stake. And we will continue to consult. I want to close by thanking every Ontarian who took the time to raise their concerns and questions throughout this process. Because of those conversations, Ontario is ready. Thank you. Merci.
Ladies and gentlemen, we're going to take a few questions. I've been handed a question just now. I know there's some people with cards there, and the Empire Club team will come around and pick them up. But Minister, I'll ask you the first question. Why the change in direction from a public model to a private retail model?
As I alluded to in the speech, we're motivated by three goals: to protect youth, keep our roads safe, and combat the illegal market. And it was our view, based on the discussions we had with our working group and through the extensive consultation process that we had, that the previous approach, a public retail approach, where store locations were chosen by the government, was not going to be successful in addressing the demand, which is strong and driven by the illegal market. And so we had to let market forces work, and that's why we decided to go with the private approach. We believe that it's essential that by going with this private approach that we'll be able to undermine the illegal market. Now, it is strong, but we believe that that is the first step in making sure that we do that.
And the second question I have is, how have you worked to address the concerns of municipalities?
AMO, the Association of Municipalities of Ontario, which represents 444 municipalities, meets every August They met in Ottawa, and the Premier was there, Minister Fideli and I were there with Minister Clark, who is the Minister of Municipal Affairs and Housing. And we had opportunities to speak with the AMO executive a few times, as well as representatives from different municipalities across the province. And so we heard their concerns. And, they often said that, they're on the ground, they're on the ones that are going to be seeing this every day in their communities. And that a one-size-fits-all approach was not going to work. And so that whatever we proposed needed to be flexible. And, there are different centers. As I said, Smith Falls is looking forward to October 17th, and other communities as well. And there are other communities that are really are worried about it. And so that's why the first decision we made was to give municipalities the option to either opt in or opt out of retail bricks and mortar stores. And so that was the first decision point that we made, and we thought that would give them, that acknowledges the fact that this is not a one-size-fits-all approach. The benefit of the opting-in decision is that it doesn't have to be made on January 22nd. Municipalities have the chance to see how things develop over time, and they can opt in at a later date. We also heard that they wanted a provincial framework, so a set of guidelines, because especially with smaller municipalities that don't have the infrastructure to manage this, they were worried that they would be overwhelmed. And so they really wanted guidance from the province. And so we worked hard to establish a set of uniform guidelines that then municipalities could work within. And then that brings us to places of use. We needed to be able to provide a set of guidelines that people are familiar with, which is the Smoke-Free Ontario Act. And then municipalities can then act to restrict, through municipal bylaws, places of use even further in accordance with what they hear in their municipalities. So the concerns of municipalities have been top of mind, and they've been part of our discussions throughout our decision-making process. And as I said, we will continue to consult. Legislation was introduced, and we still will be going through the regulation-making authority, and so we will continue to consult. It will evolve, but their input was invaluable to this process.
This next question appears to be about workplace. So like alcohol, is there a way to test for the fitness of service? An example is operating a nuclear power plant. Did that come from Bruce Power? It must come from Bruce Power. Okay, go ahead.
So I've heard some concerns from employers. Employers should take a look at their guidelines. You don't want your employees working impaired. And cannabis is impairing, and so therefore you've got to make sure and make it clear to your employees that they cannot. I saw this morning that the RCMP is making a decision on what that means for them and for their officers, and so employers will need to take a look at that. The federal government, in terms of determining impairment, the federal government is approving devices. We encourage them to approve more devices, especially ones that are cost-effective and effective for use by police forces across the province. But with respect to employers and their relationship with their employees, I'm sure they have a bright line that employees cannot be coming to work impaired in any way, shape, or form. And since the rules or the determination of impairment around cannabis use can be difficult to determine, I would encourage them to take a pretty strict approach.
So this next question looks to be about impaired driving. So how exactly will the government and law enforcement protect and detect the consumption of cannabis for driving?
So we have a zero-tolerance policy for driving impaired with youth, novice drivers, and commercial drivers. And strict penalties came into force in January, and there'll be further ones coming into force came into force in July, and stricter ones will be coming into force in January. The federal government is looking at devices, and they approved one recently for police forces to use. It's called the Draeger, and it tests for impairment. And so, as I said, I encourage the federal government to continue to find new devices to make sure that police forces have what they need to do that.
Great. And the last question will be, what will be the risk and consequences of crossing the border to the United States, where marijuana is not legally federally? will the traces of marijuana result in denial of entry?
So I don't think this came up in the last NAFTA talks, but I hope that it's a topic that I'll be raising with the federal justice minister, and I'm sure that attorneys general around the country will be doing the same. We want to make sure that something that is legal in our country does not prohibit people from going back and forth, and I understand that this could be an issue. It has been for certain people. So it is something that I will be advocating for. We don't want people to be incapable of going across the border to work or for vacation or whatever their purposes are. So we want to make sure that that we address this. It's a big issue. Now that we've gotten to October 17th, we're almost at October 17th. I think it's essential that we try to get some clarity on that before, so that people are not stopped at the border. But I don't have a clear answer on that yet.
Thank you, Minister. I'm now going to invite our future keynote speaker to the stage to give the thank you, who is also our sponsor for the day, La Una, and Joseph Mancinelli. Thank you.
Attorney General Carolyn Mulroney, Minister Tibolo, executive members of the Empire Club, members of the Empire Club, ladies and gentlemen, what a pleasure to be with you and to listen to an intelligent, responsible approach to the introduction of legalization of recreational cannabis. I represent 120,000 construction workers primarily, and our $8 billion pension plan has invested in cannabis, and in particular, we're the largest shareholder in a company called Starseed Medicinal. Now, it's medicinal cannabis. It's not the recreational, but it does present some of the same problems that were asked about the workplace. For example, when one of our construction workers consumes cannabis, cannabis stays in your system a lot longer than alcohol. And if they're tested going to a job site, there's a chance that they would be denied entry because of the confusion between being inebriated with cannabis and it being in your system. There is a big difference between the two. So we're glad that there are mechanisms that are in place, or at least coming, that will detect the amount of THC that's in their systems. Because what we're worried about, for instance, is some workers that may be sick, might have cancer. They may be taking CBD oil that has no THC, but if they're tested for cannabis, cannabis is going to show up in their system, but there's no THC, so there's no problem with how clear they are, and they're not inebriated. So there's one example where there's some fine lines that need to be looked at, and some gray areas that definitely we hope will be cleared up. It's clear that our new government here in Ontario, in a very short period of time, has shown the ability to listen very carefully to the citizens of Ontario. And in fact, to paraphrase our Attorney General and what she said, that politicians are elected first and foremost to listen to the priorities of their citizens. And that is so true, Carolyn, and it's so refreshing to hear that from you, that your government is listening and continues to listen very carefully to the concerns and aspirations of Ontarians. I have 5 children and 2 grandchildren. Carolyn has 4. We've done our share to promote good economy. However, our concern, and especially as Attorney General, is to ensure that the safety of our children and the safety of these future generations are protected, not only from cannabis, but in so many different ways, whether it be the job that our Minister Tibolo does with regards to policing, or what Carolyn does as the Attorney General, is so important in protecting the future of our families and Ontarians. So we enjoyed so much hearing from you. Keep up the good work, and I can't believe that it's only been 3 months that you have achieved so much, not only on the cannabis file, but also in reducing the amount of councillors at City Hall, which we very much support. And and a number of other initiatives that show very carefully that you are listening to the concerns of Ontarians. So thank you for being with us today. We very much enjoyed your presentation, and keep up the good work in representing Ontarians. Thank you.
Finally, please join us for our next event on the schedule. John Chen, the CEO of BlackBerry, will be here in conversation with Amber Kamwar, who is from BNN, on October 17th. And that's also here at the Arcadian Court. And we are also hosting Minister Phillips at the end of the month on October 30th, which I believe is sold out already. So for those of you who are coming, I will see you there, and thank you for today's event. You know where you heard this news-making speech? You heard it at the Empire Club of Canada. Thanks for coming today.